Hallelujah, hallelujah, hallelujah. Hallelujah, hallelujah, hallelujah.
The Holy Gospel according to Luke.
Glory to you, O Lord.
Some people were talking about the temple, how it was decorated with beautiful stones and ornaments dedicated to God. Jesus said, "As for the things you are admiring, the time is coming when not even one stone will be left upon another. All will be demolished." They asked him, "Teacher, when will these things happen? What sign will show that these things are about to happen?" Jesus said, "Watch out that you aren't deceived. Many will come in my name saying, 'I'm the one,' and 'it's time.' Don't follow them. When you hear of wars and rebellions, don't be alarmed. These things must happen first, but the end won't happen immediately." Then Jesus said to them, "Nations and kingdoms will fight against each other. There will be great earthquakes and wide-scale food shortages and epidemics. There will also be terrifying sights and great signs in the sky. But before all this occurs, they will take you into custody and harass you because of your faith. They will hand you over to synagogues and prisons, and you will be brought before kings and governors because of my name. This will provide you with an opportunity to testify. Make up your minds not to prepare your defense in advance. I'll give you words and wisdom that none of your opponents will be able to counter or contradict. You will be betrayed by your parents, brothers and sisters, relatives, and friends. They will execute some of you. Everyone will hate you because of my name. Still, not a hair on your heads will be lost. By holding fast, you will gain your lives." The Gospel of the Lord.
Praise to you, O Christ.
So we can imagine, right, everyone standing around admiring the temple, this grand, impressive structure that had just recently been refurbished by Herod the Great. And in the presence of such a grand building, it must have been hard for folks to imagine how something so strong, so sturdy, so beautiful could be a pile of rubble. And I do wonder how many perhaps just scoffed at Jesus's warning, who turned away, especially when Jesus goes on and on and on about all of the terrible things that will happen. There must have been this huge disconnect for these folks hearing these dire predictions in the presence of this grand, imposing temple. But I think for us, sitting here, when we hear Jesus speak of these things, his warnings hit a little too close to home. Extreme weather events, floods and droughts, disease. This has been our life in recent years, all related to the changing climate that scientists have been drawing our attention to for decades. A changing climate that we know is caused by human action. And it's overwhelming how extensive, how multi-layered this crisis is and how we are implicated in it. So this summer, I was back home visiting family in Saskatchewan. That's where I grew up, although I've been in Ontario now for probably about 15 years or so. We were back there for a visit after not being able to go for a couple of years because of COVID. Unfortunately, I contracted COVID when we were traveling. I shared it with a bunch of my family. And so we ended up having a bit of an extended stay at my sister and brother-in-law's farm in southwestern Saskatchewan near Grasslands National Park. So thankfully, none of us got too ill. It wasn't very much fun, of course, having COVID. But I was very grateful for that extra time at my sister's farm. We had planned to just go for the weekend and ended up being there for a week as she cared for us and we recovered from COVID. And I was grateful for that place to be there because, as I shared earlier, the prairies are my magical place, my wonderful place, that place where I feel God's presence and power most closely. And I think if you've been to the prairies, you know there's not much there, but a lot of sky. And there's something about having that sky meet the horizon that just have that sense of awe, awesomeness, but also a sense of closeness to God for me. The prairies are one of the, if probably not the most underrated ecosystem in Canada. Right? They're not the flashiest of geographies or ecosystems, but they are deeply beautiful in their own way. And you kind of have to be there and be up close with them to see that. They're also the most endangered ecosystem in Canada. Over 70% has been converted to cropland or for other uses. They aren't flashy, as I said, but they're a really important ecosystem, right? We often think about the rainforests, right? The importance of those trees, but the prairies, the native prairie especially, play that same role in carbon capture, right? They have these deep root systems that they hold a lot of carbon. They keep that in these deep root networks. So at my sister's farm, I mean, I have an understanding, I always did, of, you know, what is cropland and what is native prairie, or at least I thought I did, right? Often it's pretty clear what cropland is, right? It's all the same, wherever that big stretch, whether it's wheat or canola or flax or whatever is being grown. But as I quarantined there this summer and we had more walks through their pastures, I started to see that even what I thought was native prairie, that some of it wasn't, that it was filled with another plant called crested wheatgrass. So if you know anything about the history of the West in Canada, right, by the 1930s, most of the prairies had been settled by immigrants, and a lot of it had already been converted to cropland. But then that decade, right, a severe and prolonged drought hit, and that land that had been plowed under, because those root systems had been disturbed, right, that's what protected against erosion. When everything was so dry and that prairie, those root systems were gone, you know, the wind would blow and it would blow the topsoil away. Erosion was a huge problem. And so the solution was crested wheatgrass. It's a plant that comes from southern Siberia and it thrives in really dry conditions. You know, the more it's neglected, the better it does. So it was perfect in that sense for this region. In the 1930s, that was the solution. They had farmers plant crested wheatgrass. It was seeded on something like 400,000 acres, and it ended up saving a lot of that land from erosion. It did what they wanted it to do. But today, they're having problems with crested wheatgrass because it does so well. It's an invasive species and it is threatening to take over those places that are still native prairie that have never been plowed under. It has effect on the soil quality as well, and there's environmental concerns related to it. My sister works for Parks Canada. That was sort of how she ended up in that part of the province. Part of her work is looking at how they can convert some of this land back to native prairie. Sounds like it should be easy enough, right? It's just grasses, right, that you plant, but it's not. The native prairie, those grasses are very slow growing. The crested wheatgrass grows a lot faster. It's hard to compete with that. So back on her farm, right, when we were on these walks this summer, she helped me identify those places that had been seeded with crested wheatgrass and which are native prairie. And you can kind of almost see, right, if you're looking out, it initially looks all the same, but there is a line, right, on the one side, it's a little bit greener. That's where it's mostly crested wheatgrass. And on the other side is what is native prairie. It doesn't maybe look as green. You have to get up close because it's a very dry part of the prairie where they are. But it is so much more diverse with all of these lichens and different grasses, wildflower, cacti, and moss. It's really, really incredible. And I was thinking of this as just one example, right, of the way human activity creates all of these problems that we don't even imagine, right? With our God-given ingenuity, we often then can come up with solutions to try and rectify a problem that we created. But often the solutions we come up with end up creating more problems, right? It kind of seems to keep going like that. It's often not until it's too late that we understand the wisdom that was inherent in nature, the way God had created it. And it's a hard reality for us to take this in, right? It's the magnitude, the complexity of the climate crisis. It's overwhelming and it can be paralyzing. I don't know if you've heard, folks are starting to use words like eco-despair, eco-anxiety, eco-grief, to describe those feelings of helplessness or overwhelm that we often feel when we're faced with the environmental degradation, with the climate crisis. And these are hard feelings. It's hard to know what to do with them. They feel like it's beyond our control, right? We feel helpless a lot of the time, that anything we might be able to do will make a difference. Jesus' words this morning, too, when we look to our gospel lesson, don't seem to offer a whole lot of hope, at least at first glance. But as I spent time with his words this week, I think there is some wisdom in what he says for us. And what I heard is this, right? Jesus says, yes, the world is often a scary, a hard place to be. If you want to be my followers, you can't ignore or escape that suffering. It is for us too. But know that suffering doesn't get the last word. I will be with you. I will help you witness to that promise of hope and life. In her book, Generation Dread, Finding Purpose in an Age of Climate Crisis, the author Britt Ray has this image where she talks about how we need to have binocular vision, right? And in the original Latin sense of this word, binocular means like having two eyes, right? So we need one eye to keep on the reality, right? The gravity of the situation. And I think for many of us, that's the easy part, right? We turn on the news and there is no shortage of articles or messages about how terrible things are, how terrible we've made things, right? And we can easily get sucked in on that and focus in on that. And that's when those feelings of despair and helplessness really kick in, right? We lose any sense of hope or possibility. So that's why we need our binoculars, right? We need that second eye to focus on the truth that even though things are bad, we don't know everything. We don't know everything about the mess that we're in. We don't know yet what might be done to adapt to it. We can still be surprised. She talks about how the climate is a really complex system. And even though things are bad, the future is not set in stone. So, if we focus just on that one eye, right, and we are just resolved to the fact that it's already too late, well, then we really don't have any hope, right? It is. But for me, the fact that even as we meet here this morning, that there are folks from around the world gathered in Egypt to keep talking about ways that we can address climate change, that itself is an act of hope. Right? There are lots of folks who are still working to make a difference, and we too, in our own way, need to keep doing our part. The future is open. There are still many possibilities. And what I loved about this image of binocular vision is I think we as Christians, we already know what it's like to have that kind of view of the world, right? Our faith is grounded in the belief that what is most definitely an ending by any measure, right? Death, Jesus's death. Well, that was God, in fact, defeating the power of death, right? That is a possibility that most would say, like, that's just can't be. But for us as people of faith, that is what our belief is centered on. We are resurrection people who believe that the worst thing is not ever the last thing. The wisdom that Jesus offers in living through times like these is that, yes, it's hard, and maybe we need to befriend those emotions that we have related to the climate crisis. And I love, again, this author, Britt Ray. She lists a bunch of different ones, things like anxiety, grief, shame, guilt, rage, depression, fear, worry, cynicism, pessimism, hopelessness, helplessness, overwhelm. I'm sure in a list like that, all of us probably can identify a few of emotions that we've felt related to the climate crisis. They're not nice emotions, but they're not bad. They're just our emotions. And if we give space to them, if we honor them, if we can find ways to express them and talk about them with one another, that's actually a really helpful thing, because when we honor our pain, when we name it, when we're able to talk about how it makes us feel, we actually can release some of the power that it holds over us. And if we can put some of the energy that we're putting into grieving into something else, when we release that, we have more energy towards actions, to doing something about the problem. It frees us from that sense of maybe being paralyzed or helpless. When we release pain, we make some space for hope to move in again. And that is how we use our binocular vision, right? There's no doubt that the climate crisis is the biggest challenge of our lifetime. To face it, we do need that hope and joy and purpose and meaning that we find in God and that we find in God's creation, right? We need that gratitude from still going and spending time in nature, or if we can't be in nature, using our imaginations to remember and connect with those feelings of how good and connected, how hopeful we feel when we have been in nature. Because it's connecting to those positive feelings that also help us move forward in hope. As we live into that call to care for creation, we use our binocular vision to hold our grief and our gratitude together, to recognize that both of them can be a gift, that both of them can help us mobilize to do the hard work of caring for creation. Because it's connecting with our gratitude and our grief that make that room for hope, for action. Hope for the fact that in spite of how bad it seems many days, we know, we believe, we trust that the future is not yet written. Amen. Our hymn of the day is number 766, Lord of Life. We will be singing it to a different tune, though, of 415, Father Most Holy. And I'll invite you to stand as you are able as we sing together.